Hi, welcome to the Linux channel. So today I was having a discussion with one of my student and we are having a discussion on usage of recursive APIs, and his question is about why I generally didn't recommended using recursive APIs in one of the videos. So we had an interesting discussion, and I thought after the outcome of the discussion, I thought let me cover an video episode about the same, so that you guys can get an idea. And moreover, more specifically, I said generally to avoid recursive APIs in a code like a kernel context, not maybe or may not be can be used in user space context, but try to avoid using in the kernel context. So this is what I was having a discussion with them, and based on that, again he asked some couple of questions and we had a nice chat regarding the same. But the thing is, it is something I generally never would like to use any recursive APIs by doing by myself. In case if it is somewhere it is existing and there is no other way, then it is fine. But other than that, if it is a question of I am architecting something, I don't mind no matter whatever optimization it gives in terms of code readability or whatever it is. Personally, I don't generally like to put any sort of recursive API. So here are a couple of reasons. So first of all, before even discussing what is a recursive API, it's just very simple. When you have an API and it is calling the same API by itself, so generally any API can call any other APIs, but in a case like recursive APIs, an API which is calling the same API, and this is where sort of the flow goes in that sort of recursive way. So the big question is, you should have a sort of exit strategy, otherwise it is going to go in a sort of infinite loop, something like that. So this is a issue. It may cause in a sort of critical system if you do any code with the bugs, and if you done some sort of an architecture without taking certain considerations, and if this recursive API is quite it's quite complicated, and if the API size is quite large, then what happens is you may have a situation in case you have forgotten to write some kind of exit strategy, then it is going to go over and over, and then it is going to crash the kernel and crash the system if it is something, or else it is going to crash if it is a user space code, or if it is something you have done in the kernel space or kernel context, it is going to crash the system itself. So essentially what happens is you can find some examples here and there. Sometimes you may use this in some kind of, I'm saying about the real practical examples. Let's forget about certain college context, like you are doing some linked list traversal using some recursive APIs for that, or else you are doing some kind of sorting or some kind of operation like that, and in that case you are using the same, or else you are finding an item in an array or something like that. So let's take let's not take those examples. Let's assume you have something like fragmentation of a network packet, and or else something like skbuff, fragmented skbuff, and you need to sort of parse that chain, and you need to bring all that discrete pieces together, and you are using some kind of recursive API so that it does each iteration and it collects, and then it creates a sort of writable skbuff packet. So these are the real world use cases, other than just you get that sort of textbook definition of recursive API. So in that way, if you see the Linux kernel source, let's take example of any code. I'm not specifically going to select. Let's take any .c file. I'm just randomly taking the same. So you can see here you have, let's take example, you have some API like this async run entry function, and in this function it is calling some other functions, and so on. So this way the flow is going to go further, and it is going to start somewhere, and it is going to flow across the entire source of your Linux kernel, or else any other user space source code. So in the case of recursive APIs, there can be a situation after some time, somewhere down the line, it may call back again the same API. So this is where it gets tricky. That's the reason I don't want to take an example like a typical textbook definition of a linked list, something like the traverse of a linked list or something like that, and say that using recursive APIs are fine or not. It is not a question of using in that sort of simple situation. In the real world applications, you may get scenarios like this, and if not this sort of API, I can give a couple of more examples which I know those APIs. Let's go to net core device.c. In this, if you see, there are some APIs which are really big. A single API can have around hundreds of lines of code. So let's take an example, something like that. So let me scroll down. There are really large APIs. As you can see here, dev alloc name, and in this API it is around having this many lines. So this is at least fine. There are still some more APIs which are quite large. So if you scroll down, you can see here register net device notifier. You can see it is quite large API. Imagine something like that, and if you introduce recursion in this kind of APIs, that's where the trouble starts. So it's not a question of whether you can use and it is allowable to use recursive APIs. It is not a question of that. It's not a question of your knowledge in programming. It's not a question of your C expertise or C++ expertise or something like that. It's a question of architectural decision. It's a question of design decision. So that's what it is. So if you ask me, I am not a person who never touches recursive APIs. So I will do some sort of a workaround, but I never like to use any sort of recursive APIs. That's about it. So the reason is I don't find it so comfortable. It's just something I don't find comfortable. You have some diagram where if you search in Google, a snake is trying to eat its own tail. So if you search something like that, you can find it here. Snake eating itself. So if you see this, a recursion represents this. So it is as terrible as this. This is what I get in my mind if I imagine about recursive APIs. So you never know which is the end, you never know which is the top, and once it goes some iterations, limitless and countless iterations, after that what is the end, right? So in case if it gets into some kind of complication, it is going to crash the system end of the day, or it is going to crash your application end of the day if it is an user space context. So this is what recursion represents. So this is as difficult to digest. It's not only about whether to use or not. It's a kind of dirty concept. So there is something like this. There is also something like you may get sometimes a recursive dreams. Once I got a recursive dream wherein which I was just awake out of my dream when I'm sleeping in the night, and suddenly I felt something odd, and then again I was awake out of the dream, another dream. So I was around 2 levels of recursive dreams, so that by the time I was awake first time, I thought I was in the reality, but in the reality I was still sleeping, and I thought really I'm out of my dream, and it is a sort of logic like that. So try to avoid as much as possible using any recursive APIs. Do some workaround and try to avoid. If you don't believe me, you can even Google about it. Something like dreams. You can see here, people will be discussing about recursive dreams, and it is quite a weird stuff. It can cause some kind of mental disturbance. In case if you have multiple recursive dreams, it can almost lead you to some kind of coma or some kind of state like that, where you never know which is the reality and which is a dream, just like the movie Matrix. So this is the sort of effect of using recursions in your design principles as well. So I don't want to say that this particular case you can use, that particular case you can use. If you are very good at it, if you know that exactly what you are doing, then it is fine. Otherwise it is outright it is good to sort of avoid it. If you ask my suggestion, I don't like using recursive APIs at any level as well. So this is what exactly we had the discussion in the afternoon with my student, and he came to my house and we are just discussing various other things, but this is what it came to my one of the topics it came in our discussion is using recursive APIs in the code, and what is the reason that I said earlier to avoid. So I just said in couple of words, I didn't told this much in depth in my video, so I was like confused why I need to say something like that. So this is the reason. Generally it is a good practice that I never use recursive algorithms, but or any sort of APIs, recursive APIs, or any sort of logic, or end of the day it is algorithms involves something like recursive sort of approach. So this is what it is. So if you are designing any carrier grade equipment, if you are designing very high performance and high reliable network appliance or something like that, keep these design principles in mind. You should it's not a place where you can show your programming skills. It's not a place where you show your capabilities or something like that. It's a place where you need to prove that the product, what you architect, the software or code, what you do is utmost reliable, and in every sort of situation it doesn't crash, it doesn't hang, and there is no room for any sort of failure. So keep that in mind when you design. It's not a place to show all your programming skills. So this is what it is. So although it is doable, it is always a case that I generally never do it. It's not about avoiding it, I never do it as well. So this is one of the things I never do in my programs as well. So that's all for this episode. In case if you have any questions, in case if you have any interesting Q&A like this, be in touch in mail. Thank you once again for watching this video. Stay tuned. Have a nice day. Bye bye.